Monday. The air in Atlanta was still, not sunny, not gloomy, the kind of weather that leaves no impression. But it's usually days like this that begin the kind of stories people never forget. Elijah Patterson arrived at the company early as usual, his janitor uniform neatly pressed, gloves still carrying the faint scent of disinfectant. He had been working at Northmore Systems for 2 weeks. The morning shift, from 6 a.m. to 2 p.m., was a time when no one paid attention to people like him. The revolving doors kept spinning, leather shoes continued to echo against the marble floors, and the automatic coffee machine hissed like a whisper behind a new hire's neck. No one asked his name. No one asked why a former computer science student was now scrubbing toilets. Elijah didn't need them to ask. He wasn't there to be noticed, at least not until he saw that photograph. The B4 maintenance corridor sat behind the old storage wing, a part of the building even the repair staff avoided. The metal door bore a fading white stencil. Utility only. Do not store personal items. Inside, the air smelled of damp wood, machine oil, and time. The fluorescent light flickered above, as if it too had survived enough stressful board meetings and refused to do overtime. Elijah was organizing a mess of tools when his eyes landed on something unfamiliar behind a dusty plastic curtain. A large frame photo. The face in the photo was partially obscured by a thin film of dust, but the eyes were still visible. A black man, dressed in a white shirt and gray tie, stood beside a massive architectural blueprint. Walls, columns, technical shafts, floor symbols. It was clearly the layout of what would become the Northmore Systems headquarters. He wasn't looking at the camera. He was looking somewhere else, beyond the wall, beyond the lens, towards something others hadn't seen yet. In the lower corner of the photo was a faded handwritten note in smudged blue ink. J.H., Northmore Blueprint Final, January 1983. No company logo, no plaque of recognition, no official caption, only dust and silence. Elijah felt something was off, not because the photo was old, but because of its absence. If the man wasn't important, why frame the picture at all? But if he was important, why had no one ever mentioned his name? Elijah gently wiped away the dust and flipped the frame over. Nothing. No record number. No archive label. He scanned the nearby metal cabinet. Inside were outdated floor plans, old electrical schematics, and PowerPoint files from an era when slides had black backgrounds and yellow fonts. But no mention of anyone named J.H. until he found a brown folder with no title. Inside it, a hand-marked blueprint of Northmore's ground floor, each utility station circled. One note was underlined 3 times. Rotate emergency exit westward, J. Holt. Elijah stood up straight. Holt. Jeremiah Holt? The name had never shown up in any official document he'd skimmed during his first week on the job. On the company website, Northmore Systems clearly stated, founded in 1984 by a visionary board of engineers and investors. No mention of Jeremiah Holt. No photo, no LinkedIn profile, no acknowledgement. The company's history was a neat pitch deck. Clean, smooth, no shadows, no tangle. But the image of that man, those eyes, told Elijah that something had once been there and had been erased. He rushed up to the 3rd floor IT room, where the high-resolution scanner was, and borrowed it during his break. Sam, a young Korean-American IT tech, was the only person who had spoken kindly to Elijah since day one. Sam didn't ask why. He glanced at the photo, then frowned. Never seen anyone at this company display something like that. Looks more like a behind-the-scenes photo from a design phase. Elijah replied quietly, "He doesn't look like a junior engineer." Sam shook his head. "Yeah, but he also doesn't look like the kind of founder this company brags about." After scanning the photo, Elijah searched Jeremiah Holt on Google. The results turned up a retired pastor, a school teacher in Missouri, and a fishing gear salesman in Mobile, Alabama. None of them architects or tech company founders. He tried LinkedIn. Nothing. No Wikipedia page. No business article. It was as if the man had never existed, and yet the building stood, and someone had drawn it before it became real. The next day, Elijah brought a printed A4 copy of the photo, sealed in a plastic sleeve, to Reese, the floor manager on 3 who oversaw admin staff and HR coordination. She glanced at the picture for a second, then chuckled. This? Probably a vendor. Someone who came in to install the old systems? Elijah didn't back down. But that's the building's blueprint in the photo. Reese's smile faded as she lifted her Starbucks cup. Sweetheart, lots of people stand next to blueprints. Doesn't mean they made a big contribution. Focus on doing your job well. Don't let your mind wander off into nonsense. Elijah nodded, but something inside had already stirred. It wasn't the photo, it was the reaction. That feeling, when people don't just dismiss information, they fear it might be true. He printed another copy of the photo, folded it into quarters, and slipped it into his wallet. The next morning, while cleaning the glass doors at the side entrance, he saw the old man again, faded wool coat, worn baseball cap, standing across the street, staring at the building like he was waiting for something that would never come. Elijah stepped outside. The old man glanced at him, brief but direct, a gaze that had seen it all and no longer needed to prove anything. Elijah was about to approach when a security guard appeared. "Hey, sir, you can't stand there all morning. This is private property." The old man said nothing. He simply turned and walked away slowly, one step at a time, like someone long used to being asked to leave places he once belonged. Elijah watched his figure disappear, his hand still gripping the folded photo in his wallet, and in that moment he realized something. The people who truly matter are rarely in the Hall of Fame. They're locked in broom closets. They're forgotten, but their presence never leaves. It just waits for someone quiet enough to hear it. And for the first time in his life, Elijah no longer felt like just a janitor. He was someone who had seen what an entire system had chosen to ignore, and he wasn't going to look away. Elijah woke up earlier than usual the next morning, not because of an alarm, not out of duty. He simply couldn't sleep, knowing something was waiting to be uncovered, like a layer of dust left untouched on concrete for years. The sky was still dim when he approached the side gate of Northmore Systems. The streets were quiet, only the sound of the first coffee machine of the day hissing from the lounge and the soft slide of glass doors opening and closing echoed in the distance. Elijah stood inside behind the glass, eyes fixed on the bench across the street. The old man was there, just like every day. Nothing had changed. The same faded gray wool coat, black baseball cap, worn sneakers, a slightly tilted posture, arms folded in front. But to Elijah, everything had changed. He no longer saw him as just an old man waiting for a bus or a shadow of the city. He saw him as an unanswered question, and today Elijah decided not to leave that question hanging. He crossed the street, his heartbeat steady but stronger than usual. He didn't know how to start, just knew that if he didn't ask, if he didn't take a step forward, everything would be buried again, like the name J.H. behind the broom closet door. He stopped a few feet away from the man, tilting slightly in a respectful gesture. The old man turned, not surprised, not guarded, just accepting Elijah's presence, as if he'd always been there. Elijah pulled the printed photo from his jacket pocket and held it out. He didn't say anything right away. The man's eyes shifted from Elijah to the photo, then back to the building across the street. A long silence followed, as if even the wind paused to wait for an answer. "You're the man in the photo, aren't you?" Elijah asked, voice low but firm. The man didn't answer right away. His eyes stayed on the silver Northmore logo shining on the glass facade. A full minute passed. Then he nodded slowly. Not a strong, proud nod, but one of quiet admission, as if acknowledging something that was once true, but no longer belonged to the present. Elijah swallowed, a feeling in his chest both lighter and heavier. "Your name is Jeremiah Holt?" The man turned to him for the first time, eyes that held no anger, no lingering sorrow, just the depth of a lake so still it made one afraid to stir it. "It used to be," he said. His voice was deep, lightly raspy, like old wood rubbing against itself. Elijah gripped the photo tighter. Why doesn't anyone at the company mention you? No name, no records, nothing at all." Jeremiah gave a faint smile, not joyful, but not bitter either. "Because they thought it was easier than facing how they began." That sentence, as simple as breath, landed like a verdict. Elijah stood still, The wind began brushing through his hair again, as if to react to the silence just broken. Jeremiah sat on the bench, resting his hands on his knees. Elijah sat down too, only a few hand-widths away. "You designed this building?" Jeremiah nodded. "Not just designed, I lived with it. Every room, every fire exit. I know it like I know my own hand. The first people who walked through those front doors, I chose them. The first bricks, I laid them. But then, it stopped mattering." Elijah leaned forward. "It doesn't matter, but it's everything. Your name should be there. On the wall." In the records, Jeremiah shook his head. "Where my name is doesn't matter as much as whether what I built still stands. I spent years trying to stop wishing it was mine." Elijah looked at him, wanting to ask a dozen questions, to know the whole truth, to understand how an entire system could forget a man like him. But at the same time, he realized not everyone is ready to recount what once hurt them, and sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is stay silent. Jeremiah stood, dusted off his hands, and turned his back on the building. "Don't try to pull me back to a place that already decided to erase me. It's not worth it." Elijah stood too, instinctively. "But you could help me understand. If not for you, then for the others, the ones who never even knew you existed." Jeremiah stopped, his back straight, shoulders still firm, not the posture of a 70-year-old. He turned again, eyes lit with something that couldn't quite be named. "You think knowing the truth will change anything?" Elijah didn't speak, but his eyes answered for him. Jeremiah looked at him a moment longer, then turned away. "I'm not promising anything, but if you really want to know, start with the old technical library. There's a floor tile that's a little loose." Elijah opened his mouth, but the man was already walking away, slowly, without looking back. Elijah watched him go, his heart heavy, but a small flame had been lit, one not meant to burn everything down, but to illuminate. He returned to the building, carrying the folded photo in his wallet, in a bigger question than the day before. If one man could build an entire structure and be written out of its history, how many other truths had been hidden in the very bricks people walked over every day? That afternoon, Elijah worked as usual, but every floor he mopped, every corner he dusted, felt like he was hearing echoes of something older than the technology powering the building. He passed by the technical library. No one ever went in there anymore, unless they were digging up old ISO paperwork or flipping through the elevator logs after a power glitch. Elijah opened the door. The hinges groaned like they hadn't been used in years. Inside was a square room, washed in soft yellow light, filled with the scent of aged paper and brittle plastic. He stepped to the center, crouched, and gently tapped each tile. Most gave back a hard, even echo, but one had a deeper sound. He pried it loose. Beneath it lay a thin wooden box, covered in mildewed oilcloth. Elijah opened it. Inside was a stack of old files, internal memos, handwritten letters, and a light brown leather notebook. The edges worn, its pages filled with blue ink and neat lines. Site notes, J. Holt. He flipped to the first page, a detailed diagram of the basement engineering room, annotated down to the smallest air ducts. Near the bottom of the page, a small line read, "Note, if anyone notices enough to find this box, let them choose. The truth doesn't need to be loud, just heard." Elijah sat there quietly for nearly an hour. No one called for him. No one noticed he was gone. But he knew. He had stepped into a place no one at the company remembered how to return to. And from that moment on, Elijah understood. The story was no longer just Jeremiah Holt's. It had become his and belonged to everyone who'd ever been forgotten simply because they didn't wear the right color, dress the right way, or live by the rules that history had arbitrarily chosen to remember. Elijah didn't return to the dorm that night. He wandered the city library until closing, then sat in the corner of a 24/7 coffee shop near 5 Point Square. Not because he was afraid, but because he knew, from the moment he opened that box, he was no longer the same person. No longer just the guy who came to Northmore Systems to mop floors and collect a paycheck. He had stepped into a room no one remembered, touched pages someone had once tried to hide beneath concrete. And once you've seen the truth, even a fragment, you can't go back to the comfort of ignorance. The next morning, Elijah arrived at work early, not to clean, but to dig into the internal directory. He sat at one of the shared kiosks, logged in using his janitor credentials, and tried to access personnel past records. His account didn't have access. He turned to the one person he trusted, Sam. Sam glanced at the screen, fingers swiftly adjusting the firewall. I really shouldn't be doing this, but if you think it's worth it, Elijah didn't answer. Sam hit enter. The screen shifted. A list appeared. Under Founding Associates, Archive, the first line read, Jeremiah L. Holt, Chief Architectural Officer, 1983 to 1992. So he was real, Elijah whispered. Sam nodded, but not with relief. He stepped back slightly, eyes fixed on the screen. I saw that name before, during a data recovery project 2 years ago. But when I asked HR about him, they called me in and warned me not to dig into unnecessary pasts. Elijah looked at him. He founded this building. Sam nodded again, and they erased him from everything considered official. They looked at each other without speaking. They didn't need to. Sometimes the truth is big enough not to need repeating. Elijah pulled the photo print from his wallet and handed it to Sam. Sam studied it carefully, then sighed. That's strong evidence, but it's still not enough to force anyone to do anything. Elijah knew that. He wasn't trying to win recognition for an old man on the street. He was trying to restore a piece of history, one that someone had deliberately buried. That afternoon, Elijah took a different approach. He went to the second-floor lounge, where admin staff usually had lunch or worked overtime. He carried the photo, sealed in a clear plastic folder, and approached an older black woman sitting alone, eating a sandwich and reading a printed newspaper, rare in a full-tech office like this. Her name tag read, Joyce M., Office Manager. Elijah knew who she was. Everyone did. She scheduled executive meetings, answered 300 emails every morning, once helped a staffer who fainted in the bathroom from stress. If anyone at Northmore had known Jeremiah Holt, it was Joyce. He approached gently. Excuse me, Ms. Joyce. Can I ask you something? Joyce looked up, eyes soft but wary, the look of someone who'd worked too long in a system that knew how to keep things hidden. Elijah held out the photo. Joyce looked. Her hand froze mid-air, the sandwich still hovering before her mouth. You knew him, didn't you? Elijah asked. Joyce didn't reply. Her eyes stayed locked on the photo. Then she set her sandwich down, wiped her hands with a napkin, and pulled her leather bag closer. What's your name? Elijah Patterson, morning janitor. Joyce nodded. I've heard of you. They say you're new, but you keep things clean, always on time. Elijah wasn't sure if he should thank her or stay quiet. He waited. Joyce looked at the photo again. He designed every hallway in this building, even the back exit by the kitchen, the one that saved 2 lives in 1995 when the basement breaker shorted and started a fire. But no one's going to tell you that. Elijah gripped the photo slightly tighter. Why not? Joyce shook her head. Because they already decided he didn't fit the image the company wanted to maintain. And once people invest money in an image, they don't like changing the mirror it reflects. Elijah had no words left. Joyce looked at him, then whispered, just loud enough so no one else could hear. You're not the first to find that photo, but you're the first to keep asking. Elijah swallowed hard. So, is there anyone else who knows? Joyce stayed quiet for a few seconds. Then she opened her bag, pulled out a folded sheet of paper, and handed it to him. If you really want to know more, look for someone named Lorna Singh. Used to be an interior architect, now works part-time in the basement archives. But you didn't hear that from me, not ever. Elijah nodded and carefully folded the paper. No one in the room noticed. Their conversation might as well have been about the weather, but underneath it, a wave was moving, old, deep, and suppressed for decades. That afternoon, Elijah made his way down to the basement archives. The door was old, needed a metal key, no fingerprint scanner, no swipe card. He knocked. A brown-skinned woman with gray hair tied low and thick glasses opened the door. Her name tag read, Lorna S., Archive Consultant. Elijah greeted her and mentioned Joyce's name. Lorna nodded slightly and opened the door to let him in. The archive room resembled a silent library, long rows of metal shelving, files sorted by year, by project, by name, or at least by the names allowed to remain. Elijah asked about Jeremiah Holt. Lorna didn't answer right away. She simply pointed toward a corner near shelf 18. Bottom row, end of the aisle. Watch the dust. Elijah followed her direction. He found an old cardboard box with no label. Inside were handwritten letters, printed presentations on colored paper, and an unsent letter. The author, Jeremiah. The opening line read, "If you're reading this letter, then you probably can't find my name anywhere anymore." Elijah read every word like he was swallowing memories. No one had gotten the chance to speak. When he looked up, Lorna was standing at the other end of the aisle, arms crossed. "I used to sketch his interior design mock-ups," she said. "He wasn't just someone who built walls. He knew what was inside them. When people started repainting the walls with different names, I quietly stepped back. But I didn't erase what he left behind. I just didn't dare speak of it either." Elijah held the letter, his chest heavy as stone. But for the first time, he didn't feel fear. He saw something clearly. They didn't leave Jeremiah Holt's name out because they didn't know it. Northmore Systems was built with a glass facade that reflected the early Atlanta sun. A polished, sleek exterior, minimal and uniform to the point where everything inside began to feel the same, even the thoughts. Elijah sat alone in the basement library, staring at the handwritten letter from Jeremiah Holt that Lorna had helped him find. Blue ink, light yellow paper, and penmanship still marked with the precision of someone trained in technical drafting. No flourishes, no complaints, just cold, clear records, as if he knew one day someone would need them. "I never signed the transfer document. They said if I stayed quiet, I'd retire with a full pension. But no one retires from something they built with both hands." Elijah read that line over and over, not just for the words, but for the silence behind them. It was the same silence Jeremiah carried each morning as he quietly passed by the company. No banners, no lawsuits, no memoirs. Just presence. And that presence in itself was a slap in the face to those who had erased him. After that night, Elijah began to act. He couldn't do it alone. Sam remained his only anchor in the digital systems. Joyce couldn't be public, but supported quietly. And now Lorna, who had preserved what no one else dared to read. Elijah began collecting documents, photos, scanned letters, old blueprints bearing J. Holt's signature. But then he realized what he truly needed was undeniable proof. Something public. Something that had once been printed, seen by the world, acknowledged, before it was erased. He returned to the city library. This time he didn't search the computers. He searched the microfilm archives, reels of printed newspapers from the 1980s. Elijah scrolled through reel after reel, eyes aching from the flickering light, fingers trembling with anticipation. Then, February 1984, an article from the Atlanta Standard, Young Visionary Designs, first all-glass tech building in Georgia. Below was a photo, a black man, Jeremiah for sure, standing beside a group of young engineers. The caption read, "Jeremiah Holt, 33, founder and lead architect of Northmore Systems." Elijah gasped. He printed the reel to paper, sealed it in a plastic folder. He now had public evidence, not hidden in boxes, not internal memos, but recorded history that had been quietly taken down. He sent the scanned article to Sam and Joyce. Sam replied with a fist emoji. Joyce simply wrote, "Be careful. Others have walked this road before, but none reached the end." Elijah didn't respond. He knew he had already passed the point of no return. He submitted a request for temporary access to the internal website editor, under the pretense of wanting to propose content for the company's 40-year anniversary celebration. The request was approved 3 days later. Once inside, he navigated to the Our Story section, the company's official origin page. The opening line still read, "Founded in 1984 by a team of engineers and investors led by Arthur Klein." No Jeremiah, no mention of the original engineering team featured in the article. Elijah dug further into the system backups. In the Edits 2001 archive folder, he found a line that read, "Removed J. Holt references. Updated leadership narrative to align with 2000 brand reset." He printed that edit log, Sent it to Sam. Sam hesitated for several minutes before messaging. What are you planning to do with this? Elijah replied with a single sentence. Change how they look at what they're standing on. Sam responded 10 minutes later. If you go, I'm going with you. But know this, there are people who won't want this truth out. 2 days later, Elijah was summoned to HR. A small meeting room, frosted windows, a round wooden table. Across from him sat a middle-aged white man. Name tag read Ryan, Senior Director of Operations. His eyes weren't angry, but they weren't friendly either. They carried the calm of someone who knew which side power stood on. Elijah, there have been some unusual activities on your internal account that required a review. Elijah didn't flinch. Ryan opened his laptop, projecting files Elijah had accessed, including the 1984 article and the 2001 website edit log. Can you explain why you were looking into these documents? Elijah sat up straight. Because I think the company should tell the truth about how it began. Ryan gave a small laugh. The truth or the effective version, those aren't always the same thing. Elijah didn't lower his voice. So effective means erasing the name of the man who built this place? Ryan stared at him. I'm not required to answer that, but I am authorized to remind you that accessing documents outside your work scope violates company policy. Elijah nodded. If I get let go for reading the truth, then that's another truth people deserve to know. The meeting ended without a decision, but from that day, Elijah's access badge was restricted. He could no longer enter the tech floors. He was reassigned to cleaning the parking garage, a place no one passed through. No cameras, no eyes. But Elijah didn't feel isolated. He felt closer to the truth than ever before. That night he met Jeremiah again. Same bench across the street. He showed him the printed article, the system update log, and a photo of the email Joyce had sent that simply read, "We're watching." Jeremiah studied the newspaper for a long time, then looked up at the building. They never thought anyone would dig up what they took down. They believed time would erase it. Elijah answered, I don't think they were wrong. I just think they didn't expect anyone would still be listening. Jeremiah didn't smile, but he placed a hand on Elijah's shoulder. It wasn't a pat of encouragement. It was something passed on from someone who once carried the torch to the one carrying it next. That same night, Elijah began to write. He opened a blank document and titled it simply, "The Name Beneath the Logo." And on the very first line he typed, "The company you walk into each morning was built by a man whose name you don't know. Not because he didn't deserve to be remembered, but because someone once feared that if you did know, you'd start asking, what else has been hidden?" The truth isn't always found in documents. Sometimes it lives in a voice, in the pauses between words, in the things never printed but once spoken and recorded. Elijah realized this when Sam sent him an audio file with no title, no description, just the label, ENT board 92 archive.wav. Where did this come from? Elijah texted. Sam replied, a data dump from an old server. Not sure, but the timestamp matches the day Holt's transition memo disappeared. Elijah put on headphones, found the most secluded spot in the building, a third-floor restroom stall, and hit play. The audio crackled faintly. Then a man's voice came through, clear, composed, likely the meeting's moderator. The issue is the company's image for the next 5 years. We need consensus on direction. Another voice jumped in, young, faster-paced. I respect Jeremiah, but his style, it doesn't fit anymore. He's too emotional, too street. A third voice added, also for the new East Coast investors, that image, it just doesn't build confidence. Silence. Then a woman spoke, slow, deliberate. Clients don't want to see someone like Jeremiah on the investment brochure. The room fell silent. Pages turned. The first voice returned. We need a more accessible face. Maybe Arthur. He has the resume, the voice, and frankly, he doesn't trigger visual hesitation. Another voice chimed in. Let's be honest. They don't want black on the cover. Elijah sat frozen, lips dry, heart heavy. That last sentence slammed like a door between two worlds, one where truth lives and the one built to replace it. He played it 3 more times, each time cutting deeper. No more doubts. No room for misinterpretation. Jeremiah Holt hadn't been removed for lack of skill or ethics, but because his skin was too dark and his truth too raw. Elijah sent the file to Sam with a single message. Keep the original, encrypt it. He sent it to Joyce as well. She called back within 3 minutes. No greeting, no questions, just a long breath. You've stepped into the dangerous part now, Elijah replied. If we don't step into it, no one else will. Joyce was quiet for a while, then asked, Are you sure you want to bring this out? You know what they do to people who stir up this stuff. Elijah thought of Jeremiah's eyes. Not angry, not afraid, just the eyes of someone who had lived with truth and knew it needed someone else to carry it forward. I'm not doing this alone, Elijah said. Joyce answered, her voice trembling slightly for the first time. No, you're not alone. That night, Elijah wrote an internal email disguised as a company newsletter. Title, The Name You Never Heard. The message didn't name anyone directly, just an opening line. Northmore was built by many, but one man was erased, not because of failure, but because of color. And he still walks past this place every morning. Anyone quiet enough to listen will hear. Attached was a short audio clip. They don't want black on the cover. No source, no context, but enough to make anyone who understood feel a chill down their spine. The email was sent at 8:47 p.m. By 9:02, the internal system flagged and removed it for sensitive content, but it was too late. 47 people had opened it, 29 had saved it, and the audio began circulating through internal Slack, iMessage, even TikTok. The next day, the atmosphere inside the company shifted. There was no official meeting, but the way people looked changed. Some lowered their eyes when passing Elijah. Others looked at him like they were seeing him, truly for the first time. Sam was called into the IT office. Joyce texted, I've been asked to take temporary leave. No reason given. Elijah kept working, still holding his mop, but now every step he took echoed like the knock of truth coming closer. Lorna messaged, Some documents from the archive were moved this morning. I wasn't notified. They're cleaning up the past. Elijah exhaled slowly. He had expected this. What he didn't expect was who stood up next. Someone with the name Klein. Marcia Klein, granddaughter of Arthur Klein, the man credited as co-founder, was vice president of brand communications. She sent an anonymous message through the internal system. I once heard my grandfather talk about Jeremiah Holt. I never imagined this is what actually happened. I want to meet, not to stop it, but to understand. Elijah agreed. They met on the rooftop, one of the least frequented spots in the building. Marcia brought an envelope. Inside was a handwritten memo signed by Arthur Klein. Internal agreement with J.L. Holt. Do not use name, image, or intellectual property in brand strategy as of 1992, Elijah read it, hands slightly shaking. They didn't just erase his name. They bought the right to forget. Marcia nodded. But real memory can't be bought, and I can't stay silent anymore. This was no longer a one-man investigation. It had become an echo, small, but strong enough to crack the silence that had lasted 30 years. Elijah looked at the building, not as glorious as the day he first entered it, but like a glass vase that hadn't been wiped in years, now revealing its dust as the light hit just right. And for the first time in his life, he knew the voice they once silenced had been heard again. Northmore began to change, not through announcements, not through press releases, not through CEO emails, but through glances. Each day Elijah walked into the building, the looks he received flickered between confusion, fear, admiration, suspicion, half avoidance, half curiosity, scanning over him like a spotlight controlled by too many hands. But Elijah didn't step into the center. He stepped backstage, observing, recording. He was no longer hunting for evidence. He had realized this system didn't lack proof. It lacked people willing to hold on to that proof carefully without letting it get swallowed by the brand optimization filter. On Tuesday afternoon, Elijah returned home, opened the drawer in his desk, and pulled out a worn leather notebook, the kind people gift to recent graduates, paired with a fine-tip gel pen. He sat down and wrote the first line. If you've ever stepped into a place and felt something was wrong, stay. He didn't write like a journalist. No analysis, no commentary, no blame. He just recorded the fragments. The meeting with Jeremiah, the letters, Joyce's eyes the moment she saw the photo again, Lorna's cautious tone, Marcia's quiet nod, and the audio clip he had played 3 times but couldn't bring himself to listen to again. He wrote slowly, deliberately, missing nothing, as if afraid that if he didn't put it on paper today, someone might erase even his own memory of it tomorrow. 3 days later, a letter from HR was taped to his locker. Notice of warning. Unauthorized access to information unrelated to assigned duties. Violation of permission protocols. Action. Enhanced monitoring. Elijah read it without surprise. He left the letter in the drawer, another small entry in his growing dossier of truth. In the following weeks, the walls closed in further. His schedule changed without notice. His assigned zones constantly shifted, from the sub-level freezer room to the tech waste yard behind the building, places no one passed where no one spoke. But Elijah didn't protest. He treated each reassignment as another chance to listen, because in the shadows people began saying things they had never dared to before. Darius, a black security guard about 10 years older than Elijah, pulled him aside after shift one day. I used to see that old man, every morning, 6:55 sharp, standing at the front entrance. But last year, someone from the executive team told me to make sure he stayed away from the building. I followed orders. I still feel ashamed. Elijah nodded. No need for comfort, just listening and writing. Miguel, an HVAC technician, told Elijah that back in 2017, he was sent to fix the old engineering floor. While rerouting pipes, he found a nameplate that had been removed from a wall. Jeremiah L. Holt, Founder's Engineering Suite. He handed it to a supervisor. A week later, he was reassigned to outdoor installation. No explanation. Elijah recorded it all. His notebook thickened. No longer blank pages, but a mesh of memories. Each person a thread, each testimony a bolt tying together a wall long dismantled. Sam began helping Elijah digitize the notebook, password protected, encrypted, and set to only open with a voice clip of Jeremiah himself. It's like a will, Sam said, for something no one else will admit ever lived. One Friday evening, Elijah returned to the ground floor break room, usually empty after 5 p.m., and found a folded note left on the table. No name. He opened it. One line. Sometimes the most important thing isn't winning, it's making sure no one forgets who lost. Below it, 3 tiny dots, Jeremiah's signature mark on blueprints, according to Lorna. Elijah folded it, tucked it into his shirt pocket. He didn't know who left it, but he understood. Someone else was carrying the torch now, too. A week later, Jeremiah stopped appearing across the street. 3 mornings in a row. No bench, no sign. Elijah began to worry. He checked every corner of the intersection, stopped by the cafe where the old man used to sip iced tea in the summer. No one had seen him. He asked a newspaper vendor nearby. The man shook his head. Probably moved. A lot of folks have been coming around lately, asking questions about him. Elijah returned to Northmore, hollow. Without Jeremiah, everything felt off-center. But that night when he arrived home, a large envelope was wedged under the door. Yellow-brown paper. No sender. Inside was a copy of Jeremiah's notebook, the final page handwritten. I didn't leave because I lost. I left because it was time for someone else to write the rest. Elijah placed it beside his own notebook. He flipped through the first page of Jeremiah's. If someone notices enough to find this box, let them choose. The truth doesn't need to be loud, only heard. He opened his own to the beginning. If you've ever stepped into a place and felt something was wrong, stay. 2 lines, 2 eras, one began it, one continued it. Elijah locked the door, sat at his desk, and opened his laptop. On the screen was the draft of an article he knew would need to be published one day. Not today, not next week, but soon. The founder they erased, and the custodian who remembered. And beneath the title he typed, I didn't come to Northmore to change the world. I came here to mop the floors. But when I discovered who laid the first brick, I understood. Sometimes cleaning isn't about wiping away dirt. It's about clearing the dust off memory. No one made the decision for Elijah the night he hit send. There was no advice, no reassurance, only a dense silence surrounding the old laptop in the corner of his apartment, and a question that refused to leave his mind. If the truth is never spoken, does it really exist? The answer was written plainly in the notebook beside him. The truth doesn't need to be loud, only heard. Elijah looked at that line, then back at the subject line he had just typed. What if the man who built this place still walks past it every morning? The opening paragraph read, "There was once a man who sketched every wall here, who designed every emergency exit, who handpicked materials and taught others how to build something out of passion, not reputation. But his name is on no honor wall. He isn't in the 40 Years of Northmore article. He's not mentioned on the website, because he didn't fit the image someone thought the clients would want to see. You may have never heard his name, but that doesn't mean he never existed." Attached were a scanned 1984 newspaper article, a black and white photo of Jeremiah beside his blueprint, and a short audio clip from the old board meeting with the phrase, "Doesn't trigger visual hesitation." And at the end of the email, Elijah wrote, "His name is Jeremiah Holt, and if you're reading this email from your desk, you're sitting inside a building he drafted from the very first line." He didn't send it to the entire company. He selected a group of 100 employees spread across admin, finance, engineering, IT, and marketing, just enough to create ripple effects, but not enough to trigger immediate system alerts. He sent it at 10:24 p.m., when content filters were slower to scan personalized messages. As the screen flashed, "Your message has been sent," Elijah closed his eyes. He didn't pray. He just felt a silence deeper than any room he'd ever cleaned. The next morning, Northmore felt like it had been coated in a new layer of glass. No one said anything, but everything had shifted. The glances were cautious, the greetings hesitant. People whispered in stairwells and pantries. Sam texted, "It's starting." 23 people have already forwarded it. A senior engineer named Marcus, who had never even spoken to Elijah before, tapped him on the shoulder in the hallway. "I didn't know about him, but thank you for letting me know." By noon, the system responded. An internal communication was sent out by corporate communications. "We are aware of an anonymous email circulating false information about the company's history. Please refrain from sharing. Our legal department is reviewing the matter." The language was polite, but the tone unmistakably threatening. Joyce messaged him, "Here we go again." At 3 p.m., Elijah was summoned to a meeting room on the 6th floor. For the first time, he stepped into the executive level, a space he'd only ever cleaned from the outside. Inside, 3 people were already seated: the head of HR, the company's legal counsel, and a man he didn't recognize. His nameplate read, Kenneth Lowell, head of risk and compliance. Kenneth's voice was calm, rehearsed, devoid of inflection, like someone reading from a manual. "We have reason to believe you were involved in distributing a chain of emails that contain unverified information, potentially damaging to the company's image and in violation of data confidentiality." Elijah didn't deny it, didn't dodge. He said directly, "I only shared a part of history this company chose not to include." Kenneth folded his arms. "You're a janitor. Your role is to keep spaces clean, not to dig beneath the foundation." Elijah sat upright. "And because I clean, I see exactly what people try to cover up." A heavy silence followed. The HR director looked at the legal representative. A small nod. "We're prepared to move forward with termination procedures if you do not immediately cease these actions." Elijah looked at all 3. He wasn't angry. He wasn't afraid. He just felt disappointed that they still believed truth could be controlled with spreadsheets and legal terms. He stood. "If I'm fired for telling the truth, then at least I know I wasn't kept for staying silent." No one answered. He left the room head high. Down in the parking level, Sam was waiting. "They're going to clamp this down hard." Elijah nodded. "Then we don't let them do it alone." He opened his notebook and wrote, "November 17th, the first time truth forced them into an emergency meeting. That means it's strong enough." Joyce texted, "A group of younger employees is trying to reach out to you. Some want to meet Mr. Holt. They said, if a building can be built wrong from the ground up, then at least its history should be told right." That evening, at the same bench across the street, Jeremiah was waiting as usual. Elijah approached. No documents, no recordings, just himself. "I sent it," he said. Jeremiah wasn't surprised. He nodded. "And what did you see after?" Elijah answered without hesitation. "I saw fear. Fear that if one person remembers, there will be a second and then a third." Jeremiah looked at the building. "You know, I was never afraid they'd erase my name. I was afraid they'd teach the next generation I never existed." Elijah sat beside him. "I won't let that happen." And in that moment, there was no CEO, no janitor, only two men, one who had once been forced out and one who chose to stay. And between them stood a truth that could no longer be buried beneath glass and concrete. There was no invitation, no scheduled meeting, no name badge, no confirmation email. He simply walked in. Monday morning. Atlanta warmed earlier than usual, and the sun tilted across the polished glass walls of Northmore Systems, turning the building's facade into a blinding sheet of light that reflected nothing but the version of reality it chose to keep. Employees entered as usual, ties straight, hair neat, backs upright as they passed through the revolving doors, one hand on a Starbucks cup, the other scrolling across phone screens. No one paid attention to the black man in a charcoal wool coat, old baseball cap, worn brown leather shoes, standing quietly at the center of the main entrance. At least not yet. Jeremiah stood still, one hand resting gently on the brim of his cap, eyes focused inward through the glass, as if counting each piece of memory disassembled. Elijah stood beside him, a few steps back, silent. No words needed. Jeremiah had made his decision. Elijah was simply the witness. A young receptionist stepped out from the front desk with a tablet in hand and noticed Jeremiah. She walked over quickly. "Sir, can I help you?" she asked, polite tone, but laced with control. Jeremiah turned to her, eyes calm. "I used to work here." She tilted her head slightly, eyes registering brief surprise. "Oh? When was that?" Jeremiah shrugged. "Back when this place was still just a blank sheet of paper." She didn't have a chance to reply. The glass door behind her opened. A manager, Elijah recognized him as Tyler from operations, stepped out, eyes scanning Jeremiah, and then halting on Elijah like he'd spotted a stain that didn't belong in the lobby. "What's going on here?" Tyler asked. The receptionist replied, "He says he used to work here, but he doesn't have a badge." Tyler looked Jeremiah up and down, his eyes narrowing, not with overt disdain, but with that practiced skepticism reserved for people assumed to be confused, or worse, trying to cause trouble. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to step outside. This is a secured corporate space." Jeremiah didn't respond. He simply reached into his inner coat pocket and pulled out a printed photograph, an image of himself standing in front of the original Northmore blueprint, dated 1983. He handed it to Tyler. Tyler took the photo, his brow furrowed. His lips moved as if trying to form a word, but no sound came out. Elijah stepped forward. "He's the one who designed this building, Jeremiah Holt, the first person to put the name Northmore on paper." Tyler turned, and for the first time, his voice carried a hint of panic. "You shouldn't say that here." Elijah didn't back down. "Then where should I say it?" "In the back lot, where you reassigned me after I asked about him." People began to slow their steps. Two marketing staffers, an engineer, an admin associate. Someone whispered, "That's him. The guy from the email last week." The whole lobby felt denser. No one raised their voice, but the silence thickened. Jeremiah stood unmoving, as if he'd been waiting at that exact spot for 30 years. And now time had finally caught up. A mid-level director named Deborah stepped out of the elevator, noticed the crowd. "What's happening?" Tyler turned, still clutching the photo. "This man claims he helped design the building." Deborah walked over. She looked at the photo, then at Jeremiah. Her eyes blinked quickly, a tell Elijah didn't miss. She knew. "You know who he is, don't you?" Elijah asked. Deborah paused, then slowly nodded. "I saw this picture once, in the offline archives in tech, but it's not there anymore." Elijah turned to Jeremiah. "Do you want to say anything?" Jeremiah scanned the lobby. All eyes were on him, but he didn't explain. He didn't demand. He didn't accuse. He spoke just one sentence. soft but louder than anything else in the lobby that morning. I didn't come back to reclaim my name. I came to remind people, no building stands without a foundation. Silence blanketed the lobby. No one moved. No one spoke. Sometimes the fewest words carry the greatest weight. And in that moment, Jeremiah Holt, the man erased from history, was seen, was heard, and was remembered. Not by the system, but by the people within it. Tyler stepped back. The young receptionist looked up and handed the photo back to Jeremiah with both hands. Deborah turned to the nearby security staff. No one stops him. No one. Elijah stepped closer, standing beside Jeremiah. A young technician, brown skinned from the engineering floor, walked up. Can I shake your hand, sir? Jeremiah nodded. They shook hands. Not a deal, not a title transfer, not an agreement. Just one human reaching for another who had once been forced out, acknowledging, you were never truly gone. That day, Jeremiah didn't go upstairs. He didn't step into a meeting room. He didn't ask for his title back, didn't talk about shares, didn't request a press conference. He simply walked the ground floor hallway, the one he'd once paced 40 years earlier as a young man, blueprint in hand, face marked with ink smudges, talking about sunlight angles and load-bearing potential. Elijah followed behind him, not guiding, just walking alongside. And when they stepped back outside, Jeremiah paused and looked up at the Northmore logo etched into the glass. He squinted. They changed the logo. Elijah asked, do you prefer the old one? Jeremiah shook his head. The old one felt more real, but the new one fits what they want people to believe. Elijah didn't respond. But he knew. The real change wasn't in the logo. It was in the eyes of the 30-plus employees who had stood silently by the glass, watching him walk in. That afternoon, a 41-second video clip was shared across the company's internal network. It showed Jeremiah entering the building. His voice played over the footage. The caption read simply, he came in quietly. But now we can't unhear him. Jeremiah didn't ask for directions. He didn't need anyone to guide him. After stepping out of the main lobby, he turned down the northern hallway, a path now used as a temporary storage corridor for media equipment. Elijah followed a few steps behind, saying nothing, simply watching the measured pace of a man who hadn't stepped into this place in nearly 3 decades. They stopped in front of the old engineering room, its nameplate long removed, replaced by a cold white sticker. Utility compartment, restricted access. Jeremiah paused. He placed his hand on the wooden door, slowly tracing the bottom edge with his fingers, like he was feeling the grain of memory. No key card, no code. The door opened when Deborah approached from behind, saying nothing, just swiping her badge and stepping aside. The room lit up with the flick of mechanical switches. A warm, dusty yellow glow filled the space. It wasn't stuffy like Elijah expected. It carried a scent, metal aged over time, old blueprint paper, melted technical plastic, and something else that smelled like time itself had been preserved behind the walls. The room was no more than 12 square meters, but Jeremiah stopped right in the center, as if he had just entered a cathedral he had once built. Elijah scanned the space. The east wall had once held the master blueprint, now just a wooden frame with nothing inside. To the left was a storage cabinet Lorna once said had held the earliest design prototypes. It now stored files stamped Brand Archive 2021. On the floor, a square patch of tile was noticeably lighter, a mark where a plaque had once sat, removed without any official trace. Jeremiah walked forward, knelt down, and gently wiped the center of that square with his hand. He didn't speak. Elijah thought to say something but couldn't find the right words. Jeremiah didn't need comfort, nor an apology from a system that never gave one. He only needed to stand once more in the place he'd helped build, like a father returning to a home he had crafted with his own hands, even if it had been sold, renamed, and claimed by others. I once argued right here, Jeremiah said suddenly, his voice low but steady. This exact spot. I told them the emergency power grid should run separately from the main, because if the central system fails, we need to isolate the physical fault. They told me I was overcomplicating it. They chose the cheaper option. 2 years later, the basement flooded when the alert system failed, but no one ever brought up that I warned them. Elijah didn't respond with words. Instead, he quietly pulled his leather notebook from his pocket, not to take notes, but to open to a page where Jeremiah had once written during the design phase. Redundancy saves lives, not just systems. Jeremiah stood, eyes scanning the room, stopping at every small detail. A protruding screw from the wall frame, a faded streak of paint bleeding into a table's edge, a patch of veneer peeling from the corner of a desk. None of it perfect, but each piece summoned the memory of someone who had once stood with him. Tommy built that table leg, Jeremiah said. He hadn't married yet. Every time he screwed in a bolt, he'd laugh and tell me I picked ugly wood. I told him, it doesn't need to be pretty, it just needs to hold. Elijah nodded. I think you were right. Jeremiah looked at him, and for the first time his eyes didn't carry the stillness of a deep lake. They lit up, a flicker of life that time hadn't erased. You're not the first to find out I was erased, but you're the first to come back into this room with me. That's the difference. Elijah smiled gently. Not everyone even knows this room existed. Jeremiah nodded. Not everyone wants to. Suddenly he walked to the metal cabinet, reached toward the back of a small tool tray, and pulled out a thin metal box. Something only someone who had placed it there would know how to find. He opened it. Inside was an old brass plaque, engraved with the words, Founders Engineering Suite, Jeremiah L. Holt, 1983. Elijah stepped closer. You kept it? Jeremiah shook his head. Someone put it back here instead of throwing it out. They didn't dare display it, but they couldn't bring themselves to destroy it either. Elijah lifted the plaque with both hands. It was heavier than expected, not just because of the brass, but because of what it meant, for a name that had once been removed to still remain. Jeremiah didn't say anything else. He simply stood in the middle of the room, fingertips brushing the old desk's edge, then turned to Elijah. I don't need my name hung back up. I just need to know no one will take it down again. Elijah placed the plaque on the desk. Then let's leave it here, like it was in the beginning. They stepped out of the room. Jeremiah paused at the threshold and looked back one last time, not to admire, but to confirm that it was still there, that the past didn't need to be rewritten with trumpets and banners, but simply restored to where it always belonged. That afternoon, Elijah didn't write anything in his notebook. He just closed the open page and wrote a single line on the back cover. He didn't need to reclaim anything, because what truly belonged to him never left. The 12th floor boardroom of Northmore Systems had never been this silent. The 8-meter walnut conference table, lined with black leather chairs on either side, gleamed under the cool glow of recessed ceiling lights. At the head of the room, the large presentation screen displayed the 6th slide of the meeting, 40th Anniversary, Strengthening Brand Identity. Beneath the title were the names of 5 CEOs throughout the decades, beginning with Arthur Klein. There was no mention of the founding chief architect, no Jeremiah, no JH, no one. Marcia Klein, vice president of brand communications and granddaughter of Arthur Klein, was no longer sitting back in her chair. She had been standing since slide 3. Her hand rested on a closed black leather notebook, an excerpt of Elijah's documentation. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was clear. I have an amendment to propose, and I won't sit down until it's heard. The room paused. Kenneth Lowell, head of risk and compliance, the same man who once threatened to fire Elijah, turned his chair toward her, half squinting as if weighing whether this was some kind of test. The current CEO, Charles Enderby, in his 60s with 3 decades of experience, gave a polite nod. Ms. Klein, we're finalizing the communications timeline. Can we? Marcia cut in. We're talking about the company's legacy narrative, and we're doing it without mentioning the man who built it. No one responded, but the atmosphere shifted. The older executives fidgeted. The younger ones, assistants, product leads, newer team managers, leaned in with interest. Marcia opened the notebook, pulled out the old brass plaque Jeremiah had left behind, now sealed in protective mica, and placed it on the table. This nameplate once hung in Northmore's original engineering suite, Jeremiah L. Holt. He designed, built, and oversaw the operating structure of this entire building. It was removed, buried, forgotten, not because he failed, but because he didn't fit the image a previous generation of leadership wanted to present. A wave of discomfort passed down the table. Kenneth interlocked his fingers. We're not denying Mr. Holt's contributions, but what happened then was handled through appropriate protocol at the time. Marcia didn't blink. Protocol? What protocol allows erasing a founder's name from company documents and purchasing the rights to his image just to ensure no one speaks of him again? Charles cleared his throat. You're making serious accusations in front of the board. Marcia tapped her laptop. The next slide appeared, a scan of the 1992 internal agreement bearing Arthur Klein's signature under the line, relinquishment of all intellectual property and brand-related image rights pertaining to Jeremiah L. Holt. The boardroom fell into heavy silence. A young product director spoke up for the first time all meeting. So we're celebrating 40 years while omitting the person who laid the foundation. Another voice. I thought Northmore prided itself on a transparent legacy. Kenneth interjected, his tone clipped. We can't risk destabilizing decades of carefully shaped identity just because of a sentimental campaign. Marcia's tone sharpened. It's not sentimental, it's the truth. And if your identity is built on hiding that truth, then maybe it deserves to be shaken. Charles leaned forward, hands braced against the table. What exactly are you proposing? Marcia took a breath. First, reinstate Jeremiah Holt's name in the official founding records, on the website, in internal materials, and with the SEC. Second, rehang the original brass plaque in the third-floor engineering room. Third, issue a public acknowledgement of our historical omission, not necessarily an apology, but a correction, a name spoken clearly. There were murmurs. Someone furrowed a brow, but no one interrupted. Kenneth sank into his chair. You realize if we do this, some of our major stakeholders may push back? Marcia looked him in the eye. And I realize if we don't, the brightest young minds in this company will continue to see us as hypocrites. Are you confident you'll retain your market position when they learn this company discarded a man like Jeremiah Holt? Charles said nothing for a long moment. No more objections came. Finally, he nodded. Form an internal team to draft the statement. Ms. Klein, you'll lead it. Marcia nodded. She didn't smile, just nodded. The boardroom remained silent, but the energy had shifted. It was the silence of a company finally choosing to face a crack in its foundation. Not to cover it up, but to seal it with something new. Courage. That afternoon, the internal statement was finalized. Northmore Systems formally recognizes Jeremiah L. Holt as the founding architect and original designer of its first building. We honor his quiet presence and ask permission to break that silence by finally saying his name. There was no scheduled ceremony, no music, no cake, no internal communications team handling post-event media. History didn't need a PR department to exist, and for a company that once prided itself on its meticulously designed hallway timelines, from seed round to Series D, from IPO day to the Singapore expansion, this was the first time an event took place that wasn't part of the brand strategy. But for those who knew, this day was a milestone, not just because Jeremiah Holt's name was restored, but because, for the first time, Northmore Systems had to look at itself, not through performance reports, but through a rearview mirror. That morning, an internal email was sent to over 200 mid and senior level staff. The subject line, quiet room, quiet history, quiet repair. No logo, no infographic, just a short paragraph, author unknown but believed to be written by Marcia Klein. We often rewrite history to fit the present, but sometimes we must return the part we once tore out, not to punish ourselves, but to become the kind of company we can be proud to name aloud. Location, third floor engineering room. Time, 11:40 a.m. Purpose, restoration of the founding chief engineer's nameplate, Jeremiah L. Holt. No one was forced to attend, no attendance lists, no mandates. But by 11:35, more than 50 people had gathered in the hallway outside the room. No small talk, no laughter, just a collective silence. Not tense, but heavy, like a thick dust everyone knew was finally about to be wiped clean. Elijah stood at the front of the crowd, no longer in janitor's uniform. He wore a crisp white shirt, a navy jacket, slacks, and leather shoes. Hair neatly combed, his expression didn't carry defiance, only the calm of someone who knew there would be no more need to present evidence today. Sam stood behind him, holding his personal camera. Joyce was present, leaning quietly against the control panel wall. The woman who had once scheduled meetings for 3 generations of CEOs, now holding a pen not for writing, but just spinning between her fingers to steady her breath. Lorna stood near the breaker box, exactly where she had redrawn the electrical schematic during the 2004 retrofit. She scanned the room, mentally checking off who was there. The engineering team lead, a few second-year interns, several employees hired less than 6 months ago, people who had never heard the name Jeremiah Holt before last month. But today they were here. At exactly 11:42, the door opened. Deborah, head of operations, entered first, carrying a thick wooden plaque wrapped in black cloth. She was followed by Marcia Klein, carrying only a slim folder, and then by Charles Enderby, the current CEO. He wasn't wearing a suit, just a blue shirt and gray tie, his face set like a man about to walk into a harder meeting than any IPO he'd ever managed. No one spoke. Elijah didn't move. He simply watched. Marcia stepped toward the south wall of the room, where the original brass nameplate for Jeremiah had once hung, before it was removed following the 1992 board meeting. The old screw marks were still there. The fresh coat of paint had never fully blended. The overhead lighting cast a slanting glow on the area, almost as if the room itself was pointing at the absence. Marcia pulled back the cloth. Beneath it was a classic, unpolished, unvarnished brass plaque. The engraving read, Jeremiah L. Holt, founder, chief engineering architect, 1983. Beneath it, in smaller letters, almost like the unspoken half of a long overdue apology, this name was once removed. Today it remains. The entire room held its breath. Joyce bowed her head. Lorna placed a hand over her heart. Sam snapped a single photo. No flash, but the room's soft light was enough to capture every detail. The etching, the grain of the wood, the eyes of everyone present bearing witness to a moment not sponsored by branding, not polished by media, but simply the restoration of something that should never have been erased. Charles Enderby stepped forward. No speech, no prepared remarks. He looked at the plaque and spoke slowly. We're not here to apologize for the past. We're here to do what's right in the present, and hope the future is grateful we did. He didn't address anyone in particular, but his gaze lingered just a second longer when it passed over Elijah. No one clapped, but no one rushed out either. Elijah was the last to step forward and touch the plaque. He didn't take a picture, didn't record it. He simply opened his notebook and wrote one line. December 4th, a nameplate returned to its rightful place. Not because someone demanded it, but because someone refused to stay silent. As the room slowly emptied, a few interns lingered. One young black woman approached Elijah. You used to be the janitor, right? Elijah nodded. And you made this company remember the man they tried to forget? Elijah smiled gently. I didn't make them remember. I just didn't let them forget forever. She didn't say anything else. She simply reached out to shake his hand. Her eyes were bright, the brightness of a new generation, one that would not be so easily swayed by polished, revised stories. That afternoon, Northmore's internal network posted a quiet update. No headline, no drop shadow, just a single photo, the newly mounted brass plaque, and a caption, for every name erased, there is someone who remembers. Today, that's enough. Jeremiah Holt left on a day without clouds, without rain, without wind. A day when Atlanta itself seemed to hold still, unwilling to disturb the footsteps of a man who had once walked this city armed only with blueprints and silence. No one knew when he left. No announcements were made. No one saw him off. There was no resignation letter, no thank you note, no farewell message. Only an older man, his hair mostly white, jacket frayed at the shoulders, walked out of Northmore one last time. Not as a forgotten shadow, but as someone who had quietly returned a lost piece of memory to its rightful place and then stepped away from the board. Elijah knew it would happen. He had seen it in Jeremiah's eyes after the plaque was restored. There was no more wait, no regret, no waiting, just a look that seemed to say, I've done my part. Now it's yours. But knowing is one thing. Feeling the absence after he truly left was another. On Monday morning, Elijah walked into the third-floor engineering room. The door was slightly ajar. No one was inside, but there was a small piece of paper left on the desk. In handwriting that was firm, slanted, and unmistakably his. A room without a name is no longer a threat, as long as someone remembers why it once had one. No signature, no date. But Elijah knew this was the final thing he left behind. He sat at the desk and opened his notebook, flipping through the pages. From the first morning he met Jeremiah on the bench across the street, to finding the blueprint in the broom closet, to his first confrontation with Kenneth in the risk office, and the moment Jeremiah stepped into the lobby under a sea of unfamiliar eyes. Each page a heartbeat, a brick, a punctuation mark ending a silence that had lasted 30 years. Elijah wrote one more line beneath the final entry. He didn't need a room to stay. He stayed inside others. 3 months after his departure, Northmore quietly established a new division named the Legacy Engineering Archive, located exactly where the original engineering room once stood on the third floor. There was no external pressure, no public campaign, no shareholder mandate, just an internal proposal, one that received over 70% employee support. Inside the room, they hung the original 1983 blueprints, photos of the founding engineering team, even Jeremiah's handwritten sketches in blue ink. And in the center, on a small glass pedestal, placed with quiet dignity, was Elijah Patterson's notebook, fully transcribed. Every line, every day, every thought, every voice that had once been forgotten. The cover read nothing but 3 simple words: the name remembered. Elijah was no longer a janitor, but he didn't take a high-ranking role either. He declined HR's offer to become Director of Cultural Heritage and Legacy Affairs. He simply said, "I don't need a title to keep doing the right thing." Instead, he chose to work part-time in the newly renamed Holt Technical Records Room alongside Lorna. He still cleaned, still dusted, but now he was dusting blueprints, original materials, and archive files no one even remembered existed. And every time a new intern arrived, he was the one who told the story, who named Northmore, who designed the West Emergency Exit, and why that name was once taken down and later put back. Not for glory, but for integrity. 1 year later, Elijah was invited to speak at Northmore's internal 40-year celebration event. He stood on a small stage in the main lobby, the same space where Jeremiah had once been asked to leave. No prepared speech, no slides, no music video. He just held the notebook and read from a passage he'd written the day Jeremiah left. A founder doesn't need to remain on a plaque if someone else carries their name through how they choose to act. Northmore used to be a building. Now it's a memory that stands upright because it learned how to bow. The room fell silent. Then came a round of applause. Slow, unscripted, and genuine. Not performative. Just a shared recognition that it was time to live inside a company that no longer had to pretend. That evening, Elijah stepped outside and walked across the street, right to the spot where Jeremiah used to sit. The bench was still there. He didn't sit. He stood, one hand in his jacket pocket, fingering a laminated, fading photo of Jeremiah standing beside the original blueprint, dated 1983. On the glass wall of the building, the Northmore logo reflected faintly in the fading light. But this time, just below the logo, in subtle engraved text that only careful eyes might notice, were the words, "Built by hands that were almost forgotten." Elijah smiled. Maybe we can't rewrite history, but we can choose to retell it, more honestly. Maybe there will always be names that get erased, but if someone remembers, then those names were never truly gone. Elijah was not a CEO, not a founder, not a figurehead of the system. But he did something an entire institution hadn't managed to do in 30 years. He listened, and he didn't stay silent. If you've ever been overlooked because you didn't have the right business card, if you've ever watched someone be erased, not because they were wrong, but because they didn't fit the story someone wanted to remember, then leave a comment, share your story, because here, every name that's retold is a refusal to forget. And if you believe kindness, fairness, and memory still have a place in this world, then subscribe to this channel, share this video, and hold on to your piece of the truth.